where discipline quietly leaks away. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from effort. It comes from discussion. You feel it in the jaw tightening before dawn. In the shoulders staying tense long after the decision is postponed. In the breath shortening as the body waits for an order that never arrives. This is not fatigue. This is the cost of inner bargaining. Most people believe discipline fails because motivation fades. They say the fire goes out. What actually happens is quieter. The fire is still there, but it is surrounded by arguments. The body stands in the doorway, shoes half on, feeling the cold floor through the soles, while the mind begins its familiar trade. Not today. Just this once. Tomorrow will be cleaner. Someone else would understand. No one is watching. You have lived this scene. The alarm stops. The room stays dim. The phone lights your face. Outside, the street is already moving. Somewhere, someone is already training. You sit on the edge of the bed, spine bent, pulse steady, negotiating with yourself as if time were neutral. It never is. Warriors and monks understood something modern life avoids. They did not argue with the morning. They did not persuade themselves into action. Their bodies moved because delay felt wrong. The ritual came first. Thought followed behind, struggling to keep up. That inversion changed everything, including how others saw them. People around you sense it when you stop negotiating. Invitations shift. Jokes appear. Silence grows heavier. The discomfort is subtle, but it spreads. Before you continue, write the habit you keep reopening for debate. One sentence. No explanation, the morning where decisions begin to rot. He looks disciplined from the outside. Clean calendar. Clear goals. Books stacked neatly by the bed. The kind of person others assume will follow through. Yet most mornings, nothing moves at first. He sits. The room is cold. Fingers stiff against the fabric of the blanket. The body waits while the mind opens court, and the delay already has weight. The negotiation never sounds dramatic. It whispers. Just today. You trained hard yesterday. No one will know. The chest tightens as the excuses line up, orderly and polite. The breath stays shallow. The feet hover above the floor, toes curling against the chill, as if waiting for permission. This is the moment where discipline begins to rot, not through failure, but through discussion. He finally stands, but slowly. Time has shifted. Outside, a neighbor's door closes. Someone else is already moving with purpose. The sound lands heavier than it should. In the kitchen, the light is too bright. The body feels dull, as if wrapped in cotton. The cost has already been paid, and nothing has been done yet. This repeats. Shoes laid out at night, still untouched in the morning. The mat rolled tight, never unrolled. The pen uncapped, hovering above the page. Each time, the body learns something dangerous. Action is optional. Choice is always open. The mind smiles at this flexibility, unaware of the damage it leaves behind. He notices it socially before he names it internally. Friends tease him for being intense, then stop teasing when intensity turns into inconsistency. Invitations come later. Expectations lower. No one says anything directly, but the air changes. Reliability has a texture, and his has begun to thin. At work, the same pattern hums beneath the surface. Tasks are started with precision, then slowed by internal debate. The shoulders tense during meetings. The jaw clenches when deadlines approach. He knows what to do. Knowledge has never been the issue. The issue is that every action must first survive a conversation with himself. The body resists this longer than the mind. There is a dull ache behind the eyes. A heaviness in the legs when standing still too long. A pulse that refuses to settle because nothing has been decided. The system is overloaded, not by effort, but by choice. Each bargain adds friction. Each exception leaves residue. This is why most people don't break under pressure. They dissolve before it arrives. By the time the real test shows up, the habit of negotiating is already entrenched. Action feels aggressive. Commitment feels extreme. Consistency feels antisocial. He senses, dimly, that the problem is not the task in front of him. It's the door he keeps reopening. And once a door becomes negotiable, it never fully closes again, the old rule that removed permission entirely. In a small training hall, the door slides open before sunrise. The floor is cold. Knees fold to the mat without ceremony. No one asks how they feel. No one asks if today is optimal. The body moves because the body has moved here before. Breath settles not from calm, but from repetition. This is how permission disappears. The man from before visits places like this in books, not in practice. He imagines discipline as intensity. He believes commitment arrives after conviction. But here, conviction is irrelevant. The hands wrap the handle the same way every morning. Fingers numb at first. Shoulders tight. The ritual proceeds anyway. Thought arrives late and finds no opening. Outside this space, people misunderstand what they are seeing. They call it rigidity. They call it obsession. The practitioner hears it in passing comments, in half smiles that don't invite response. Social warmth cools slightly around him. He does not correct them. Explanation would reopen the door. Back home, the contrast becomes uncomfortable. The man notices how many decisions fill his day. What to wear? When to start? How long to continue? Each choice carries weight. By evening, his neck aches. His eyes burn from screens. The body has absorbed 1,000 small permissions and is tired of granting them. He tries removing one. Training at the same hour. Same place. Same opening movement. The first morning, resistance rises immediately. The chest tightens. The mind panics at the loss of flexibility. He steps onto the floor anyway. The surface is colder than expected. Calves stiff. Breath uneven. He feels exposed, as if watched, though no one is there. The second morning, the resistance changes shape. It arrives earlier, while still in bed. The jaw sets. The phone vibrates nearby. Messages can wait. He stands before the argument fully forms. The body moves first, clumsy but compliant. Something inside him resents this. Something else relaxes. By the fifth morning, the social friction appears. He leaves gatherings early. He declines late plans. Friends raise eyebrows. Someone jokes about him becoming monk-like. He notices the joke lands differently than before. Less warmth. More distance. The cost is real, and it is paid immediately. What he gains is quieter. The pulse steadies faster once movement begins. The shoulders drop sooner. The breath finds its rhythm without instruction. The body stops asking why. This is the old rule warriors lived by. Remove permission, and effort reorganizes itself. Leave permission in place, and effort leaks out through negotiation. The rule is simple, but it is not gentle. It changes how time feels. It changes how people treat you. It changes which parts of yourself get a vote. He senses that if he keeps this rule, something else will be demanded of him. Not more intensity. More loss. And he is not yet sure what he will have to give up next, where the body refuses to be persuaded. This is where most mornings collapse, not in failure, but in negotiation. The body is ready before the mind admits it. Feet touch the floor. The cold bites. Calves tense. The spine straightens on its own. Then the mind intervenes, late and loud, asking for reasons it should never have been allowed to request. He feels it as a pressure behind the eyes. Heat gathers there when the argument starts. The breath turns shallow. The shoulders creep upward as if bracing for impact. The body has already voted, but the mind demands a recount. It always does. The bargaining follows a pattern. Reduce the effort. Delay the start. Redefine the goal. Each concession feels small, civilized. The body absorbs the delay like grit in a joint. Movement becomes heavier. The first step feels exaggerated, almost rude, as if action itself were an interruption. He notices the internal voices sound reasonable. They borrow the language of care, of balance, of sustainability. The pulse quickens anyway. The body knows this tone. It has heard it before, just before weeks disappear. In a training hall, this moment is treated differently. When hesitation appears, intensity drops, not consistency. The practitioner shortens the session, moves slower, keeps the chain intact. The floor is still cold. Knees still meet the mat. The ritual remains unbroken. The body registers continuity and releases its grip. At home, he tries this once. Wakes heavy. Legs dull. Sleep still clinging to the muscles. He lowers the volume instead of canceling. One sequence. One page. One slow circuit. The body resists at first, then adjusts. Breath counts return. The pulse steadies. The argument loses its fuel. Later that day, someone comments on his quietness. He is less reactive. Less available. A colleague asks if everything is okay. He nods. The social temperature shifts again. Consistency has side effects. It changes how present you are for others, and how present you are for yourself. The internal war doesn't end. It changes terrain. The mind stops arguing about whether to begin and starts negotiating about how much. The shoulders tighten during rest. The jaw sets between sets. The body is learning, but it is not yet dominant. He recognizes the danger here. Partial victories feel satisfying. They invite celebration. Celebration invites permission. He finishes early one morning and feels relief instead of completion. The relief is a warning. The door has been reopened, just slightly. By evening, fatigue settles into the legs. A dull ache lingers, not from effort, but from restraint. He senses that discipline is not asking him to do more. It is asking him to stop speaking when action is already underway. This is the invisible battlefield. Not will against weakness, but movement against conversation. And as long as the conversation continues, the body will never fully take command, the single path that leaves no alternatives. The next failure doesn't come from weakness. It comes from options. Too many ways to begin. Too many acceptable versions of enough. He feels at the moment the schedule shifts. A meeting moves. A night runs long. The body wakes at the usual hour, but the mind smells opportunity. The floor is still cold. The mat still waits. The choice has returned. When choice appears, posture changes first. The spine bends slightly. Weight settles into one hip. The breath pauses mid-inhale. He stands still longer than necessary, eyes unfocused, as if scanning for approval that will never arrive. This is the cost of flexibility. It asks to be paid every time. In older systems, there was only one way through the morning. Same hour. Same entry. Same first movement. Weather did not vote. Mood did not vote. The body moved because deviation carried shame heavier than discomfort. Not public shame. Internal. The kind that settles in the stomach and does not leave. He experiments with this severity. Removes variation. Fixes the sequence so tightly it feels crude. The first week is rough. The body rebels. Hips stiff. Ankles ache. The pulse spikes early. Socially, it causes friction immediately. He stops negotiating plans. Leaves rooms mid-conversation. People notice. Someone asks if he's angry. He isn't. He's occupied. By the second week, something changes. The body no longer waits for explanation. Hands reach for the same objects without instruction. The belt is tied before the mind checks the time. Breath finds rhythm sooner. The internal noise does not disappear, but it loses authority. It speaks from farther away. What surprises him most is the emotional flatness. No surge. No pride. Just a steady pressure, like weight resting correctly on the frame. The relief is physical. Shoulders drop sooner. Jaw unclenches mid-movement. The body recognizes a single path and stops guarding the exits. Others react more clearly now. Invitations dry up. Friends stop asking if he's free just in case. Someone says he's become predictable. The word is not meant kindly. He accepts it anyway. Predictability has mass. It presses back against chaos. There are days when the path feels narrow, almost hostile. Injury flares. Sleep thins. The mind suggests adjustments. Creativity. Balance. He notices the tone immediately. He reduces intensity instead. Shortens the session. Slows the pace. Keeps the path intact. The body responds with gratitude that feels like silence. This is the rule he had been avoiding. One way through the day. No branches. No discussion. He senses that if this holds, there will be a moment when the body moves even if the mind refuses entirely. That thought unsettles him. It suggests a loss of control he has not yet agreed to. And still, tomorrow's path is already set, continuity that survives bad days. The mistake comes quietly, dressed as discipline. He misses a day and feels the urge to compensate. Longer session tomorrow. Harder pace. Extra time. The body reacts immediately. Shoulders tense. Breath tightens. The thought of making up for the gap already feels heavier than the original work. This is where most chains snap. He wakes with a low fever one morning. Skin warm. Mouth dry. The room smells stale. The floor is still cold. His knees ache before they touch it. The old voice offers mercy. Rest fully. Start again when clean. The offer sounds reasonable. It always does. Instead, he kneels briefly. Spine upright. One slow sequence. Breath shallow but steady. The body complains, then softens. 10 minutes later, he stands. No relief. No pride. Just continuity intact. The chain holds, thin but unbroken. Later that week, someone notices he left early again. You don't have to be so extreme, they say, half joking. He feels the social pressure land in the chest, a dull compression. He nods once. Explanation would cost more than silence. He leaves anyway. The body begins to trust this pattern. On tired days, intensity drops without discussion. On chaotic days, duration shortens automatically. On clear days, work expands naturally. No announcements. No internal debates. The adjustment happens inside the movement, not before it. He realizes how much damage perfection has done. The all-or-nothing thinking had disguised itself as standards. Miss once, restart completely. Fall behind, quit quietly. The body had learned that effort invited judgment. Now, effort feels neutral again. Almost dull. There is a physical marker for the shift. The breath no longer spikes when starting. The pulse settles faster after stopping. The legs carry a mild, familiar ache instead of sharp resistance. The body recognizes the work as normal, not heroic. Socially, the distance widens. He is less dramatic about progress. He does not announce goals. He declines praise awkwardly. People lose interest. A few stay curious, then uneasy. Continuity doesn't perform well in conversation. It lacks peaks. One evening, he catches himself almost bargaining again. The thought slips in, you've been consistent enough. You've earned flexibility. The jaw tightens. The shoulders rise. He notices it immediately and moves before the sentence finishes forming. The body answers faster now. This is the quiet victory. Not momentum. Not confidence. Predictability. The kind that survives illness, boredom, and minor collapse. The river does not surge every day. It does not stop either. It thins. It thickens. It continues. He senses the next challenge approaching. Not breaking the chain, but living with the identity that comes from never letting it break. That weight feels heavier than effort ever did, when obstacles no longer ask for decisions. The disruption arrives without warning. A late night. A delayed train. An unexpected call that fractures the morning. He feels it immediately in the body. Sleep still clings behind the eyes. The neck is stiff. The room feels unfamiliar, even though it isn't. This is where the old version of him would pause and reassess. Pause used to mean think. Think used to mean bargain. Now, something else happens. The body reaches for the nearest available slot without ceremony. Not optimal. Not clean. Just available. The floor is still cold. The breath still rough. The movement begins anyway, compressed but intact. This did not come from discipline as effort. It came from rehearsed response. When schedule breaks, the next opening is taken. When space disappears, scale shrinks. When fatigue spikes, pace drops. No internal meeting is called. He feels the difference physically. There is less spike in heart rate when plans collapse. The shoulders still tense, but they release faster. The jaw no longer locks when improvisation is required. The body recognizes disruption as a condition, not a crisis. Others notice this before he does. Someone comments on how calm he stays when things go wrong. Another says he's hard to throw off. The words land oddly. He does not feel calm. He feels decided. There is a difference. Calm is emotional. Decision is structural. Internally, the old voice still tries. It looks for loopholes. Exceptional circumstances. Reasonable delays. The tone is softer now, almost respectful. It knows it no longer has final authority. The body moves while the voice finishes its sentence. There is a cost to this, and it becomes clearer socially. He is less accommodating. Less flexible with his own boundaries. People hesitate before asking him to bend. Some stop asking entirely. The distance is subtle but permanent. He feels it in pauses, in conversations that end sooner. Physically, the system grows quieter. Breath recovers faster after stress. Muscles release without conscious effort. Sleep deepens even when shorter. The body trusts that it will be used, regardless of conditions. This trust changes the internal landscape. Obstacles no longer feel like threats. They feel like tests that have already been answered. The anxiety that once preceded disruption fades because there is no longer a question attached to it. He realizes this is what most people never build. Not resilience. Predecision. The removal of choice before pressure arrives. Without it, every obstacle demands creativity. With it, obstacles are absorbed into the structure. The unsettling part comes next. He notices how much of his former personality was built around negotiation. The explanations. The justifications. The visible struggle. Without them, he appears colder. Simpler. Less relatable. He senses the final shift approaching. The moment where discipline is no longer something he maintains, but something others must adjust to. That kind of gravity changes rooms. It also isolates. And he is not yet certain how much isolation this path will ultimately require, the point where others adjust to you. It happens quietly, without announcement. He notices it in the way rooms respond. Conversations pause when he enters. Plans are phrased carefully around him. Someone says, "He probably won't," and no one challenges it. The words are not hostile. They are factual. His consistency has become a fixed object others must navigate. The body carries this shift first. Posture stays upright without effort. The breath remains even under mild tension. The hands move with fewer wasted gestures. There is less checking, less scanning for permission. The body assumes follow-through as the default state. What disappears surprises him. The internal noise fades. Not silence, absence. The arguments no longer arrive on time. When they do, they feel outdated, like instructions written for a system that no longer exists. The body begins moving before the mind assembles its case. Sometimes the mind never catches up. Socially, the cost sharpens. He is described as hard to read, rigid, unavailable. The warmth that once came from shared struggle is gone. He no longer performs difficulty. He simply does what was already decided. This unsettles people more than failure ever did. At a gathering, someone jokes that he's become extreme. Laughter follows, thin and brief. He feels the words land in the chest, a familiar compression, but it dissolves quickly. There is nothing to defend. The path is already chosen. He leaves early. No apology. The floor outside is cold. The air sharp in the lungs. Relief arrives not as pleasure, but as alignment. There are moments of doubt, but they are physical now, not philosophical. A tight hip. A strained shoulder. A heavy eyelid late in the day. The body signals limits. He adjusts intensity without question. The chain holds. The system corrects itself. He realizes something fundamental has inverted. Discipline no longer asks for his energy. It supplies it. The time once spent arguing is now available for execution. The fatigue he feels at night is clean, earned. Sleep comes without bargaining. Others begin to mirror him unconsciously. Meetings start on time when he's present. Deadlines are treated with more respect. Not because he demands it, but because his presence removes ambiguity. People either align or drift away. Both outcomes are clean. This is the true cost of ending inner bargaining. You lose relatability. You lose flexibility in the eyes of others. You lose the social comfort of visible struggle. What you gain cannot be explained without reopening the door. It can only be felt in the body when movement begins without consent from the mind. When action no longer feels brave or forced, just inevitable. He senses that nothing more needs to be added. No new rules. No higher standards. Only the continued refusal to negotiate what has already been decided. And with that refusal, the last familiar version of himself finally stops asking for a vote. The identity that no longer negotiates. Discipline is not something you do every day. It is something you become when negotiation ends. You can feel the difference in the body first. The morning no longer asks permission. The floor is cold and irrelevant. Breath enters the lungs without resistance. Muscles engage before thought arranges itself. The day begins already decided. What once felt rigid now feels merciful. This is the quiet truth most people avoid. The unshakable person is not the strongest. It is the one who no longer bargains with himself. Inner bargaining feels humane, flexible, intelligent. It promises comfort and balance. What it actually builds is delay, erosion, and quiet self-distrust. Each negotiation teaches the body that words outrank action. Over time, action stops reporting for duty. When that stops, something stark replaces it. A body that moves without asking. A schedule that does not explain itself. A presence that removes ambiguity from rooms. You lose things this way. You lose the excuse. You lose the shared language of struggle. You lose people who preferred you undecided. What remains is narrower, heavier, and real. A single path through the day. A system that adjusts without debate. Fatigue that comes from use, not avoidance. sleep that arrives clean. This is not about becoming disciplined. It is about becoming someone who does not negotiate with what has already been chosen. If you are still bargaining, this will feel extreme. If you are done bargaining, this will feel familiar. Comment your public commitment. One action. No explanation. No context. Subscribe not because this motivated you, but because this exposed you.